Well, I'll just start by welcoming everyone to our final education program of the season. We will resume again in September, and we've had wonderful monthly presentations. My name is Linda Bauman. I'm the current president of the UNA for Dane County, and I'm going to encourage you to visit our website, and there are ways to sign up for membership if you haven't already done so. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, who will introduce our program for tonight.
Thank you. My name is Erin Thornley Parisi, and I'm the chair of the Education Committee, which allows me to do this. I just want to quickly add to what Linda said that if you are interested in membership, our website, it's easy to remember. It's unadane.org, unadane.org, and feel free to go on there. There are a lot of benefits for being a member of the UNA USA. So I was looking at Joe smiling, and now I'm wondering if I'm doing something funny. I don't know.
No,
Anyway.
I'm sorry. Your daughter walked by and was doing something funny.
Ah, okay.
We're in the same
anyway.
house, different floors.
Right. Okay, so I am, yeah. So I am honored to introduce this evening's guests, Joe Parisi and Kathy Kuntz. Is that correct pronunciation? On pronunciation, Kathy. Joe Parisi has called Dane County home his entire life. He sought out political service as a way to give back to a community that has given so much to him. Joe was first elected as county executive, the chief elected leader of Dane County in 2011, after 6 years at the state assembly and 8 years as the Dane County clerk. Joe's priority is to ensure that everyone in our community has access to the opportunity to succeed. He believes investing in people pays big dividends. Joe knows this work because he experienced it. Now, Joe believes it is his turn to give back to ensure that our children's generation has access to the same opportunities that were available to him. Joe, his wife, Erin Thornley Parisi, and their 2 daughters live on Madison's east side with a population of more than 500,000 and an annual county budget of $600 million. Dane County is Wisconsin's second largest county. Dane County has the highest private sector job and population growth in Wisconsin. Kathy Kuntz is the director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change in Madison. Kathy has more than 25 years of experience implementing programs focused on resource efficiency and climate action. Prior to joining Dane County, Kathy led Cool Choices, a nonprofit that worked with businesses and local governments to engage employees in sustainable practices. And prior to that, Kathy had led Focus on Energy, Wisconsin's statewide energy efficiency and renewable energy programs. So there's a lot of great experience there between the 2 of them. So I just want to ask everybody to enjoy tonight's presentation, and I welcome Joe and Kathy, and I thank you all for being here this evening.
Thanks, Erin. Thank you, everyone, for having us. I'm really excited to be here tonight because, well, first of all, Kathy and I love doing these presentations because we're so thrilled about the work that we're doing and excited about the path ahead. But for me, it's also really nice to be in front of a group of people who really get the global connection to the work that we're doing locally. And when Kathy speaks, she's going to talk a little bit about how our work overlaps with the UN goals. And you know, folks on this call understand the challenges that climate change pose across the world and the impacts that they have, and that those who contribute the least to climate change are usually the folks who are impacted the greatest by it, be it, you know, folks who are climate refugees, which we're seeing now, to folks, you know, like who live in Bangladesh, who live in Central America, that the impacts of climate change, that not only the flooding piece, but the drought piece, the water scarcity piece, it's a big deal. And it's a very challenging, I think it's the challenge of our generation right now. It has to be, because if we don't address it, we're going to be in big trouble. The good news is it's not too late. And the good news is as important as the work on the federal level and the state level and the international level is, there is so much that we can do locally, and really so much that we need to do locally. It really brings home the old saying, you know, think globally, act locally, because there's so much we can do. So a little history on Dane County's efforts in this area. Beginning, you know, probably close to 10 years ago, we started looking at what the impacts of climate change would be locally, so that we could prepare through, you know, through our channels and the responsibilities that we have in county government for what to expect from our changing climate. So we partnered with the University of Wisconsin and asked them to do some modeling for us to show us how climate change would impact us locally. And as folks would expect now, looking back, because we've learned so much since then, the results were kind of twofold. First of all, that we were going to have much warmer and wetter weather, and we would have torrential downfalls like we've seen the last few summers, particularly 3 years ago in the flooding, and that we would have not only more precipitation, but more all at once. So we looked at first from an emergency preparedness standpoint and kind of a business as usual, not being business as usual standpoint. We shared our information with all of our department heads, from the highway department to public works to human services and public health, because the changing climate will impact us on so many levels. And we've made adjustments, be it looking at how we construct roads and what size culverts we use, looking at where we build, public health, looking at what new diseases may we be dealing with because of climate change. So as we look at adaptation, we also felt it was important that we do our part to reduce the impact of global warming locally, to reduce our impact, our climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. So first we looked internally into county government operations. And we have many buildings and facilities, and we use a lot of electricity and gas and other resources in county government. So as we looked at our buildings, which consume a lot of energy and emit a lot of greenhouse gases, we did an inventory and started looking at energy efficiency upgrades. And we began budgeting $2 million annually to do those energy efficiency upgrades internally. And that's been an ongoing process for a number of years now. And folks who know this know that that's where your biggest bang for your buck is. Energy efficiency, the payback in dollars is a very quick turnaround, and you can reduce your emissions greatly. Then we started looking at options for utilizing renewable energy, and we assessed all of our facilities, both those that exist already and those that were on the drawing board to be constructed, for their ability not only to be more energy efficient, but to accept solar power. So as we speak today, we have, I believe we're up to 16 solar installations on various county facilities. The largest of which you may have seen if you drive down Highway 51 around the other side of the airport. We have a 9 megawatt solar field that went online just earlier this year. And this is a great example of a win-win-win, not just a win-win. So as we look to offset our energy use, we identified land out at the airport that was suitable, that we own, that was suitable for solar. We approached MG&E and said, if you will develop a solar field on these acres, and we promise we will buy you the electricity, but here's the deal. We want you to pay to build it. We will lease you the land at market rate, and we want to pay less for the electricity than we're paying now. So for MG&E, because the cost of solar has come down precipitously in the last few years, they did the math and it made sense. So with no taxpayer dollars, in fact, money coming in from the land lease that they pay us, MG&E constructed this facility. They have a guaranteed customer in Dane County. They sell us the electricity. Just that solar field alone offsets 40% of Dane County government's electricity use. And because of the lower energy rate, we'll save about $150,000 annually in our electric bill just from that one development. So when we look at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, saving tax dollars, great utilization of land, and then the other piece of this that's so important, if we were just writing a check and buying electricity that's coming off the grid from coal-fired power plants, that money, you might as well be lighting that money on fire and heating with it, because you're never going to see it again. But when we invest dollars, or in this case, convinced MG&E to invest dollars to build this facility, there were hundreds of people on the job working during the height of the pandemic, because they were able to safely do so outside. When thousands, tens of thousands of people were losing their jobs, we were putting people to work constructing a renewable energy facility. So the benefits, it's no longer this trade-off of, well, we want to help the environment, but it's too expensive. We want to help the environment, but it's not good for the economy. That dynamic doesn't exist anymore. And that's one of the reasons we're in such an exciting and hopeful place when it comes to doing what we need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another really exciting cutting edge project that we have going on in Dane County government, and we've been, again, first in the state to do something like this, and so we're really excited about it. A few years back, we started looking at how we could better utilize the methane gas that's generated in the county landfill. As you may know, Dane County has a landfill. Landfills generate methane gas, which is an extremely powerful greenhouse gas. It's more powerful than CO2. Now, we used to take that and we were pretty environmentally friendly with it. We would burn it and generate renewable electricity with it. But the marketplace no longer supports that, and the utilities didn't want to buy our electricity anymore. So we needed to figure out what to do. And so our staff came up with a plan that they brought to me and convinced me to take a leap and try. And we invested about $28 million to build a facility at our landfill that extracts, cleans, and compresses that methane gas to a purity that we can sell it into the interstate natural gas pipeline as transportation fuel. And this is fuel literally from that banana peel you threw away 3 weeks ago and it went to the landfill and rotted. We're taking that methane gas and we are selling it, and it's fueling vehicles in Wisconsin. Now, that investment pays off tremendously, not only in offsetting greenhouse gases, but between the price we get for the gas and certain renewable energy credits that are available, we have a net profit of several $1 million annually from that project. So that project will pay for itself in about a half dozen years, and then it will be several $1 million of profit every year that won't be tax dollars coming out of your pocket. It'll be money that we get for utilizing what was a waste material. We also take that compressed natural gas and we fuel county vehicles with it. So you see those big orange snowplows and trucks on the highway for the county. We're up to about half of those now being fueled by renewable natural gas that we generate at our airport. And again, it not only replaces diesel fuel and offsets the emissions from that, it costs us about $1.50 a gallon to fill up with that. So we're saving taxpayer dollars and we're benefiting the environment. And then one last piece of this that's a really interesting tie-in is that you may have heard of some of our lakes cleanup efforts that we do. And this seems like it might be separate from climate change, but I'll tie it all together in a second. So as you know, our lakes have challenges. We see in July and August, we get algae blooms, it's mucky, it's just not, sometimes they're not nice to be around. We have a many years long effort in partnerships throughout the county working to reduce the phosphorus that runs off from lawns, from cornfields, and whenever it rains, which is the source of most of that muck that we see in our lakes, because phosphorus and other nutrients result in the growth of that algae. So our plan and what we have to do to reduce, to clean up our lakes is reduce the amount of phosphorus that goes into the lakes. One of our tools in that is working in partnership with our local farmers. We've developed 2 manure digesters. Now what these are is big anaerobic digesters. So each digester is fed by 3 dairy farms worth of manure. They take that manure, it separates out the phosphorus, so we don't have that phosphorus spread on the ground to run off into the lakes. But then it goes through an anaerobic digestion process that removes and purifies the methane gas from it. So it removes the methane gas from that agricultural section of the puzzle. And we take that gas, and they used to generate electricity with it and make some money that way. But they're facing the same challenges that we are, with the utilities not being interested in that energy anymore. So when we built our facility at the landfill, we built it so it would accept trucked in biocompressed natural gas too, because we wanted to make sure that our digesters were able to tap into that market too. So now our digesters are converting to be able to clean and compress that gas and bring it in and sell it through our landfill hookup. And so that makes their economic model much more viable. It allows them to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while at the same time doing their important work to clean up our lakes. So we're really excited and proud of all the work we do at our landfill. We give, pre-COVID times, about 150 tours a year of the landfill. And, we not only want to do what's right in Dane County, but we want others to come and copy us. And so we give a lot of technical assistance. We show them how we're doing things because we want to have an impact even beyond Dane County. So once we got our own house in order, which we believe is the first step in doing anything, right? Before you tell someone else what to do, you should be doing it yourself and you should be walking the walk. We step back and ask the question, how can we have a bigger impact throughout Dane County beyond government? So a few years ago, I created what's called the Office of Energy and Climate Change in the County Executive's Office. That's the office that Kathy heads now. And what we did is our first project was to look countywide and convene a group to develop a community climate action plan. And this would be a plan, this will be the plan that Kathy will talk a little bit about, that looks at how can we, regardless of what the federal government or the state government's going to do, because that pendulum kind of swings back and forth, what's under our control and how can we bring the community together to make a serious reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So this council got together, spent about 2 years developing this plan, and the plan was launched last year during the pandemic. Now that was the development stage. Kathy came on, she worked in the office before this and then came on as the director right around the time we launched the plan, which was perfect timing because as you recall from her resume, implementation is her forte. And we are in the implementation phase now. And so we're talking to different groups, we're working with different people, different organizations, businesses, et cetera, on educating people about where Dane County's greenhouse gas emissions come from, and then looking at nuts and bolts ways that we can work to reduce those emissions. So that's why we love to talk to groups like you. We love to get the word out, and the work we do, Kathy will talk about it. It's not just for, it's residential, it's for businesses, but it's also for people if you belong to a faith community. We're working with the Wisconsin Council of Churches, folks like that. So there are a lot of things that people can do, and we're doing our best to provide people with that roadmap. Because as you know, a lot of times people will say, I want to make a difference, but I don't know where to start. And so we hope to help educate people on different things folks can do to make that difference. So I think now I'll hand it over to Kathy and she'll walk you through the plan, and then we're happy to take any questions anyone has. So thanks.
Terrific, thank you. So I'm going to pull up my slide deck. Can you see my deck? Yep, okay, good, terrific. So I'm going to dig in a little bit more to what's in the climate action plan, and then we'll open it up for questions. So as the county exec said, we convened this really diverse council on climate change to create the plan. So business was there, utilities were there, university experts were there, farmers were there, environmental advocates, really all segments of our community. And whenever I talk about the plan, I think it's really important for me to say two things about it. The first is that the plan is pragmatic. You just heard Joe talk about the things the county has done. Joe likes to get results. And at the very first meeting of the council, he said to them, figure out what we can get done. He didn't want some kind of theoretical document about what might be if the federal government supported our efforts or something like that. He wanted, what can we do given our authority? So our plan is very pragmatic. It's also, though, really visionary in that it looks at all of the things we can accomplish while we reduce our emissions. And so it's thinking really big picture and multiple wins. And here I want to just for context, bring in, 5 years ago, the UN set up the Sustainable Development Goals. At that point, I was doing climate action at Cool Choices, and it was really exciting to see the UN bring together all of these goals to connect people in the environment and the economy, and how all of these things need to be accomplished at once. I want to suggest to you that these Sustainable Development Goals have a lot of parallels to our guiding principles. So if you think the first principle for us is equity and justice, it's really getting to that point Joe raised earlier, that some of the folks who are least responsible for climate impacts are seeing the worst impacts. And so, equity and justice is about addressing poverty and hunger and gender equality and reduce inequalities, all of those things. Similarly, our economic benefits are represented here: affordable and clean energy, decent work, industry, sustainable communities, responsible consumption. Health, there's a SDG about health and well-being. There are also goals around clean water and sanitation and peace and justice organizations. Ecosystem benefits, so again, clean water, but also life below water, life on land, climate action. Adaptation and resiliency, we're already seeing impacts of climate change in Dane County, and we need to think about how to respond to those things. Again, that really ties to the UN goals about affordable and clean energy, sustainable cities, climate action. And then our final principle is really about bridging the rural and urban divide in our community. And so again, that ties to sustainable cities, affordability, reduced inequalities. So earlier, Joe said, it's that think globally, act locally. When I started comparing these two things, it just became so clear to me that local climate action is a way to achieve progress on these really important SDGs that the UN has established. So there's a lot of parallel there for us to talk about tonight. When we created the plan, when you create a big plan, you want to know where you're starting. And so let me give you a couple of context things for the plan. The executive mentioned this, for our plan, the university scientists at the Wisconsin Initiative for Climate Change Impacts updated their projections for us in Dane County and all of Wisconsin. And the message stays the same. It's going to get hotter and wetter. We're going to see more uncomfortable heat events where it doesn't cool off at night the way we were used to it doing in Wisconsin in the past. And we're going to see more of those big rain events. Both of those things have impacts in our communities that life-threatening kinds of impacts. So that's an important thing for us to think about. The other sort of starting point is, of course, understanding what our emissions are now. So we created a 2016 county-wide inventory. So across all of Dane County in 2016, all of our collective actions produced about 7.5 million metric tons of carbon equivalents. Joe earlier mentioned methane. So what happens is we convert everything from other gases to carbon equivalents so that we can kind of talk about it. In the pie chart, you see that the biggest piece of our emissions is electricity. In Wisconsin, most of our electricity comes from burning coal and natural gas today. Still. So there are significant emissions there. These two pieces labeled residential and commercial next to that, that's the natural gas we burn in our buildings to heat space and water. So a little bit over half of this pie is our built environment. And then more than half of the rest of the pie is our transportation systems. So that just gives you a little bit of a sense of scale as we start talking about deep reductions to our emissions, where we're likely to be starting with those things. To develop the core of the plan, my predecessor, Keith Riopel, assembled subject matter working groups and had them, focus on energy efficiency or transportation and come up with recommendations that went to the council, and they went back and forth. And ultimately in the plan, there are more than 100 recommendations. I'm not going to talk about the 100 recommendations because that would take us all night. I'm going to give you a framework for this. So to reduce our emissions, there's 3 primary things we think about doing. The first is eliminating waste. And that's wasted energy, but it's also wasted water or food. Anytime we take a resource, we refine it, we transport it around, and then we waste it, that's just all emissions we didn't need to emit. So we've got to become much better at being efficient. That's the first piece. The second piece is that we need to get the energy we still need to use from clean sources. So that's electricity from solar and wind, that's renewable natural gas coming from the landfill or manure digesters. And then the final piece is to couple all of that. So to use that clean energy for all of our needs. So that means that our buildings ultimately will transition from being heated with natural gas to being heated with super efficient heat pumps on the electric side, that our vehicles will be electric and RNG. And so all of those facilities are zero emissions under that category. In addition to reducing our emissions here in Dane County, because we're the kind of space we are, we also have opportunities to sequester more carbon in our plants and soils. So we can increase our forests, we can increase our prairies, which hold carbon. We can do things like cover crops in our agricultural systems that puts more carbon into the soil. All of that helps us pull more carbon out of the air and make this all fit together. Now, here I'm giving you kind of a high level, these are the strategies. I want to assure you though, in the plan, we have very specific goals and benchmarks around everything we want to do. So I have goals around how much energy efficiency we want to achieve, how much solar and wind power we want, the percentage of vehicles that we want to transition to electric. We have all of those really discrete numbers. And these are ambitious targets, but they're all doable targets. And when we hit these targets, we will cut in half total countywide emissions by 2030. Now, some of you might think that number rings a little bit of a bell because just a couple of weeks ago, President Biden said that that is his new national goal for climate change, that the country cut its emissions in half by 2030. So the president has that goal. The good news for you is here in Dane County, we have a plan to do it. We know what it's going to take to get there. We've figured that all out. The plan, though, of course, is just the beginning. It's a plan. Okay, my boss likes results. The core things my office is doing now to implement the plan is really, there are 2 big things. The first is I'm doing things to make it easy for individuals and businesses and local governments to reduce their emissions. For me, that's job 1. Make it easy for people to do these things. The second thing I'm doing is celebrating their leadership when they take those actions so that that becomes a virtuous circle and more people do more things. And of course, I'm also keeping track of how we're doing so that we can report on all of that. I want to give you just a couple of examples. So this is a page on our website, daneclimateaction.org, where there's a bunch of resources for individuals, businesses, and communities, including faith-based communities. Give you just a couple of examples and then open it up for questions. So we want to make it easy for local governments, the cities, towns, and villages in Dane County to adopt sustainable practices. And the county exec worked with Madison's mayor a couple of years ago to create the Sustainability Leaders Collaborative. So bringing staff from all of those local governments together to learn from each other. Last summer, as an example, we did this event. This was an event for fleet managers from across the county where we brought in our RNG snowplows. We brought in some of Madison's electric vehicles, and we invited fleet managers to come and kick the tires and talk to other fleet managers. And so it was really that kind of frontline folks learning from each other, moving that conversation forward. And, you know, I'm happy to report that we're seeing Sun Prairie, Verona, a number of communities are starting to move to cleaner police vehicles and other things because they know other folks are doing this. It's less of a risk if you know someone else is doing it. So that's a way we're removing barriers. For business, one of the big barriers to adopting clean energy is the upfront investment cost. You know, you have to pay for the solar panels. Yes, there's a benefit once you have them, but you have to pay for that upfront. So we have a thing called property assessed clean energy financing, where businesses, but also nonprofits, including churches and other kind of private nonprofits, can borrow against their property assessment for an energy efficiency project. And essentially the savings from the project always are bigger than the loan payment. So from the beginning, these projects are net positive. So an entity can put solar on their roof and from the beginning of the project, see a positive gain on their books. That's making it easier for businesses to do these things. On the residential side, we really think that a key is folks need, and the county exec said this, they need roadmaps or guides. You need to know who else has done these things. You need to know what to do. We've got a great carbon footprint tool on our website where you can put in the specifics of your house and it will compare you to other houses in your zip code and let you know where your emissions are high and what you can do about that. We're also trying to build a network of local folks who've done things like bought an electric vehicle or installed solar, who are willing to talk to their neighbors about this, who are willing to talk to friends and family, because we know you need that trusted resource. So all of that is a piece of that. I also talked about celebrating leadership. So last fall, we launched our Climate Champions program. And this program recognizes businesses and local governments that are leading on some aspect of climate action. So we've got more than 30 entities on our interactive Climate Champions map who might be really good at energy efficiency or waste reduction or other things. And we're showcasing them and celebrating them to get other businesses and local governments inspired to do things too. And so that's an ongoing program where folks can earn that recognition. You know, ultimately, this is really about mobilization. We are partnering with a myriad of entities. Just today, I had a call with a bunch of faith communities, helping them think about what more they could do, how we can work together. We talked to workplace green teams, other kinds of neighborhood groups like yours. And ultimately in all of that, we want to empower people to be an example that inspires others, to use that positive reinforcement, and to help us move the climate action plan forward. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing so we can take questions.
Hey, Kathy, there are questions stacking up in the chat at the bottom. Yeah, so if you want to start with those, I'm not sure who's going to answer them, you or Joe, but you could start there maybe.
Can I just, before we do that, happy to do that, there were a couple of things I kind of forgot to mention, just as, which I always do, and then Kathy says something and it reminds me that I forgot something. Some of our ongoing efforts that the county has along the sequestration front that Kathy mentioned, which is such an important piece of the work, is we have a pretty aggressive program aimed at purchasing for preservation and renovation of various lands. For example, we purchased right outside of Middleton, it's been 2 years ago now, 160-acre property that was a farm that was slated for development. It was platted and slated. And this was a very sensitive property for our lake. And we were really concerned about runoff and both for flooding and for clean water. But it also provided a great opportunity for us to convert 160 acres of farmland into prairie and wetland. And so again, this is one of those opportunities where we have these multiple benefits We're helping to prevent flooding, helping to clean up our land, and then sequester a whole bunch of carbon in those prairies. And as folks may know, prairies sequester roughly the same amount of carbon in the soil that forested land does. And so we have a pretty aggressive land purchasing program that we've had for a number of years, and we're certainly upping our game on the restoration piece of that for all of the above reasons also. And then I know there was some, and Kathy can, if there are more specifics I don't hit, I know there were some questions about transportation in the chat. One of the things we do is look how we can support alternative transportation at the county. As you may know, county government in Wisconsin, other than Milwaukee, doesn't fund public transit. It's run by the municipalities, and they receive the federal and state funding that goes to that. But we partner with, for example, we're in discussions with the city of Madison right now as they move toward bus rapid transit to look at how we can customize our infrastructure when we're redoing a road, you know, because some roads like University Avenue, Monona Drive, et cetera, those are actually county roads. We're looking at when we modify, when we do an addition to the airport, how can we do that to accommodate bus rapid transit? How can we look at development for what we can control to accommodate the development of mass transit? Because it's key that people have alternatives. We've also introduced a program, well, it's been about 10 years ago now. I introduced it as soon as I became county executive, to look at every time we redo roads. County Highway redoes a lot of roads. We don't always build or expand roads. We repave a lot of roads. Looking at, do those roads have bike lanes? And if not, adding bike lanes to them if it's physically possible. If they do, can we widen them? We've also invested millions and millions of dollars on off-road bike trails, and we continue to do so. We have some amazing bike trails that exist in Dane County and that we piece together, and they're very popular. A lot of folks are partnering with us in various communities. And then lastly, as so many others, after the pandemic, we're really taking a much different look at remote work possibilities, as are so many other businesses. So, because the main idea, whether it's biking, walking, remote work, trains, buses, et cetera, is getting people out of their cars and giving them options. So that thread is woven through everything that we do within our niche of where we can impact land, development or infrastructure, and partner with people in all forms of alternative transportation. And I don't know, Kathy, if you had anything to add to that, or if I missed anything. I saw there were comments about it, but I didn't read them all.
Yeah, I think you hit all the transit pieces of this. Yeah. There's a question here about the transition from gas furnaces to high efficiency heat pump heat exchangers. So historically, people south of us used heat pumps to both heat and cool their homes, but traditional heat pumps didn't work very well when you got below, say, 0 degrees. The new cold climate heat pumps, a lot of them are rated to 15 to 20 below, and we're seeing even better performance out of some of them. Now, I think what's going to happen with heat pumps in our climate is we're first going to see them in new construction. In Wisconsin, we build some of the most energy efficient new homes in the nation. We've multiple times received awards for how efficient our new construction is. And when a house is really well built, a cold climate heat pump can keep it comfortable even at very low temperatures. Those cold climate heat pumps are going to need to evolve a little bit more before they maybe come into some of our, I live in a house that was built in the 40s. And even though I've done a lot to insulate it, there's only so much you can fix in a brick house that was built in the 40s. So it's going to take a while for that heat pump to maybe be powerful enough for my house. Now, because a heat pump does both the heating and cooling, because you get air conditioning and heating, if you think about that one appliance replacing two, the costs are getting to be comparable. mean, a heat pump would look expensive if you were just replacing your furnace, but since it's also replacing your air conditioner, you know, the numbers are a little bit closer. If that addressed that. And I just want to think the other thing, at the top, we had a question about the environmental risks of solar fields. And, you know, solar is a really interesting technology because solar panels are solid state. So there's really relatively little that can happen to a solar panel that's installed somewhere. It's very often you see in storms that roofs are torn off and the solar panels might have been torn off with the roof, but they're pretty much in solid, you know, laying there on the ground looking good, ready to be put back on. I think when we see solar fields, you know, one of the things we're seeing and at our airport project, we're planting pollinator fields underneath those solar panels. So those solar panels, when you get a big array like our 9 megawatt array, you've got solar panels on posts, and then you've got all the ground underneath that. And when you put pollinator prairie on there, you can do a lot to really make that soil first a lot healthier, but also holding more carbon in the time that you're doing solar above it. So that's sort of an added benefit to those fields. You get some, we might end up with more wildlife in that field up by the solar. I don't know. We'll see what, we have lots of butterflies there or something. What other questions do folks have for us?
This is Linda. There were some questions in the chat about transportation in the county and rail.
Yeah, I mean, we're very supportive of those projects if they can come together. A lot of that depends, as folks know, on multiple levels of government coming together, state, federal, local governments, and we're always ready to partner with folks and participate on that. I think one of the reasons it's not necessarily highlighted in the climate action plan for us, again, as I said, again, county government doesn't operate a mass transit system, but we're really focused on the climate action plan at the art of the possible. What do we control? It's, you know, again, it's always good to, this doesn't like mean we don't partner with other folks on some of these other big picture items and issues that are more long-term policy related. But, you know, we designed this so that, okay, regardless of who's in control in the state, regardless of who's president, what is still under our control, what concrete steps can we take to continue to move the needle forward? And fortunately, there are many. But again, it's, you know, certainly not to the exclusion of working on these other big picture items, because they're certainly important too. You see someone's talking about water quality. Yeah, water quality is huge, you know, and a lot of the work that we do, it's nice that it has that multiple benefit. A lot of our land restoration of helping us work on cleaning up the water while offsetting carbon and providing habitat. You know, we have other programs in addition to our purchases that we make in restoration of our lands. For example, about 3 years ago, we began a program called our Continuous Cover Program, where we fund, if there are farmers who are farming marginal land or they want, you know, that really shouldn't be farmed, but for you know, because of the economics, they're still trying to farm it. Or if they're looking at, gee, maybe I'd like to go from row cropping to rotational grazing, which is much better for the soil and sequesters carbon, but I don't have those dollars. We initiated a grant program that helps farmers who want to convert to rotational grazing or to set aside some of their land and plant it in perennial grasses or native prairie to do those conversions. And that has been a very popular program. So, you know, there are a whole bunch of different, you know, issues like that that we tackle that have those multiple benefits. Yeah, we involved the school system? We sure do. And we do a lot of outreach through our Land and Water Resources Department, which is where our Parks Department is, on, you know, doing education, getting young people out into our parks, especially like young people who maybe are living in areas and that are underserved and maybe they don't have access to parks. We have programs to get them out into the parks and learn about wildlife and environmental protection. I don't know, Kathy, if there's anything else along those lines I'm missing.
So I just would share kind of my favorite thing about that. There's a high school student in Middleton who actually started a Dane County Youth Environmental Committee. So she brought together high school students from across the county to work on climate change issues. And they're sort of an active ally of ours. You know, I have a volunteer who goes to their meetings and kind of serves as a liaison and helps us figure out ways to connect them to resources. But the youth in our communities are very interested in these issues and doing some pretty cool stuff all on their own, these young people. I love when I get to listen to them talk about what they're doing. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. I mean, if you spend enough time with younger people, they're laser focused on this issue and about doing something about it. And so that definitely gives me a lot of hope.
I'm wondering, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Kathy, because I'm sure it's more relevant to what.
I was just going to say there's a question about installing electric charging stations for cars, and the county is working right now actually on some. So we installed a charging station just recently out at Lake Farm Park at the Lucier Center out there. But we're also putting some in at a few dog parks across the county as a good place to sort of increase visibility. You know, as the county, we want to put them in places that are sort of county facilities. And so we've been thinking about our parks and different places that can kind of increase access to electric vehicle charging. So yeah, there is some of that going on.
And Lucier Park, you know, I should mention, if folks ever want to go down there at Lake Farm Park, it's really interesting. It's a park, for those of you who don't know, that it has a kind of a center where there are some offices and I don't know if you'd call it a nature center, but a building. But it's also a place where people can bring their RVs and camp, and there are bike trails, hiking trails, a lot of beautiful nature there. And we decided a couple of years ago that we wanted to, since that was such a beautiful area, but it consumed a lot of energy between the RVs and the building, we wanted to make that a net zero park facility. And so we just kind of celebrated the flipping the switch on that on Earth Day. And so there are solar panels everywhere out there. There's solar panels on the roof of the building. There are some ground mounted panels. And then we have some new park shelters whose roofs are solar panels, and they're the kind of solar panels. Are they the dual solar panels, Kathy? No, they're not. So it's just the roof is the solar panels, and so that offsets those solar arrays, all of the energy that's used by plugging in all the RVs, the shower room there, for the RVs, plus the building, and we have those EV charging stations there. So not only did we want to offset the electricity, but we wanted, again, a place that gets a lot of foot traffic so people could see what's possible and to see what you can do when you think about it. You know, if you're going to build a shelter, you're going to have to put a roof on it. Why not make it solar and offset your electricity costs?
So one thing I was wondering if it's appropriate to share. And this was just something I had to have explained to me because I didn't understand the Suck the Muck program and how that's cleaning up the lakes. And so Joe explained it to me, as this, is that as like each lake is a basin of water, and they're each connected by pipes underneath, and how you have to clean them so that, anyway, I thought maybe you could do that analogy for everybody else, because I thought it was a good way to help understand it, but also for people to explain it to other people.
Sure. So there are two different kind of so-called dredging projects going on. One is we call Suck the Muck. So I was talking before about all this phosphorus runoff that runs into streams and runs into lakes and results in algae blooms. Again, this is to the water quality question. And that's been going on for over 100 years, right? I mean, and that stuff's just been washing in and washing in. So as we do all of our work upstream to diminish the amount of phosphorus going into the stream, into the lakes, we found that there's still a whole bunch of it in the muck that has accumulated over decades in our streams. Some of it 6-7 feet of muck, phosphorus-laden muck. So we've been going in there every year for the last couple of years with hydraulic dredgers and literally sucking that muck out. And in the last 2 years, we removed the equivalent of 100,000 pounds of phosphorus, tons of sediment, 100,000 pounds of phosphorus. And each pound of phosphorus dissolved in the water can result in 500 pounds of algae. So that's one of our dredging projects that we'll be doing for the next several years to remove more of those nutrients that are in the system, so there's less feed basically for the algae. The other project we're doing speaks to basically the analogy Aaron was talking about, where our 4 lakes are basically like 4 sinks, and they're all connected. And when we get these huge downfalls that we've been getting, and the flooding that we're getting, and that we will see more of because of climate change, what happens is all the water that goes into Lake Mendota has to go through all 4 lakes. And those connections between the lakes, those have become clogged over the decades too, but those mostly with like construction site runoff. It's more sand and that kind of thing. But what happens is the water can't move through and empty out of the chain of lakes fast enough to absorb those downpours, and that's when we get the lake flooding. So we're also dredging in between with a different set of dredging machines in between every one of the lakes to open up those channels. And that'll be about a 4-year process there. So when we get those heavy rains, we can better move them out of the system so they don't back up and cause as much flooding as we see today.
I'm just going to keep on asking questions until somebody else steps up. But this isn't a question. It's just that I hear one side of this all the time. So, but since we have a prominent member of the board, David and probably Hilda as well, who have been volunteering at the parks, maybe I was just wondering if Kathy or Joe, if you could talk about those volunteer opportunities and how, because Joe was all excited about that, like, that's so great he does that, and why that is such an important thing. And a lot of people here volunteer a lot. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, so to the folks who do that, thank you so much. We have so many parks in Dane County. It's something I'm really proud of. And one of our things we try to do with a lot of our trails and bike trails is connect those parks by trail also. But because we have so much land, excuse me, there's just more than we can humanly maintain in county government. We'd have to hire, hundreds more staff people. There's just not the money to do that. And so we have a lot of friends groups and volunteers of various parks. And the volunteers do so many different types of work. They'll remove invasives, which is huge, to help restore that habitat. The prairie restoration that I was talking about that we do and that we're doing at the property out by Pheasant Branch and a lot of other places, most of that is done by volunteers. They're led by county staff who are the guides, but the volunteers gather prairie seeds from our prairies in the fall and winter and save us hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then go out and help plant them in the fields that we're restoring to prairie the next year. And there are just multiple opportunities for people who like to get outdoors to volunteer in the parks. And the amount of if you look at the number of volunteer hours and the amount of worth that provides our community, in restoring these lands, because I mean, I've been educated a little. Sometimes you look at a forest and think, gee, that looks pretty. That's a nice forest. If you don't know it, it's the oak trees are being smothered by invasives, right? And they're invasive species that are wreaking havoc on the habitat. But our volunteers go in there with our staff and help remove those invasives and restore oak savannas and properties like that to the way they were pre-European settlement. So it's very much appreciated, and it helps a ton.
Could you answer one of the questions that was on the chat about when you suck the muck? Where do you put the muck when it's
Yeah,
sucked
that's a
out?
good question. So it depends on the property. That's part of the assessment every year that we have to do when we suck it. But so, for example, last year, the muck we sucked was a mile down the road from a place that had been a quarry that we purchased, and we were reestablishing, renovating, restoring. And so what we did was we piped all of that muck that they sucked out of the stream bed over to this quarry and used it to fill up the area we needed to fill back up to restore it, covered that with topsoil, seeded it with prairie seedings, and now it's a prairie. And so what that did was, even though that muck has a lot of phosphorus in it, it'll stay there forever because now it's sequestered and it's covered by prairie, and when it rains, it's not going to run off. So we try to do things like that. Usually it varies project by project, but it often gets used for some type of fill and restoration project, and we try to do it in a responsible way. But yeah, that's one of the logistics we always have to figure out. Now the muck, it's not really muck, that's sand from the dredging projects in between the lakes. Because it's basically sand that is run off, we use that, and for that gets used for construction. So that they dredge in between the lakes, and then they reuse that, they recycle it in construction, so it replaces sand that would have been mined. So I was really happy that they were able to find such an environmentally sound, way to utilize that product too. I think there was another question. I don't know. Did you see that, Kathy or Aaron?
There was a use for the seaweed in the lakes.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Right now, we've worked on composting it. It was interesting. I saw an article the other day that talked about feeding cattle like seaweed, right, from the sea, and how it reduced the amount of methane they produced dramatically. And I thought, I wonder if that would work with our lake weeds. So I actually mentioned that to someone, and we might, just see if we could get someone to partner with us to do a little experiment. But yeah, usually that gets filled or composted right now, and we're trying to work on a better way to utilize that. If folks have any ideas, feel free to share.
I have a question. You were talking about how you get together with different government bodies and different municipalities and so forth, and even a little bit of the businesses. And so I'm curious, have you tried, or are you doing anything with like venture capitalists as they're trying to bring in new business? Because it sounds like some of the businesses you're working with are already established, so you're trying to help them to convert. But what about some of the new investment that's coming into the county?
Yeah, so that's part of what we use to develop one of our manure digesters. Actually, one that exists was bought out by, I don't know that they're technically venture capitalists, Kathy, or not, but Brightmark Energy, this organization that invests in renewable projects. And that was a great partner. We were excited that they came in, because not only did they purchase the digester, but they are doing upgrades to it. They're the first ones to convert it to create renewable natural gas, the compressed natural gas I talked about. They're bringing in additional farms, so they're going to add a whole nother tank. There are 3 tanks now of manure, and they're putting solar power up throughout the entire project. So yeah, we look to them for our new investments, in those types of ventures. But if you have any ideas beyond that, feel free, if you want offline to share them with us, because part of why we do this also is to get people's thoughts and ideas, because we obviously don't think of everything, and there, just so many of you have just such varied experience that it's always really helpful to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. The only thing I'd add there is we have had some interactions with some other, Terry Jo, like startups. The example I think of is Zerology, which now is really mostly called Mobile 22. So it's the startup that converted green cab to Teslas and is now sort of in the mobility app arena in that space. And so some of the startups out of the Spark building on East Washington and things, we've had some interactions, but it's an interesting point that there probably are more of those young companies that certainly some of those groups, particularly when they're led by young people, tend to be really environmentally conscious. And there's some of the entities that we're recognizing already through things like Climate Champions. So yeah, it's an interesting point.
Well, and when we look at some of the new solar companies too, when in the work that's being done there, when we look at kind of the social justice aspect of this, one of the neat things that happens when you pull people together, like just the fact that we brought people together to work on our climate action plan. We had Ruben Anthony from the Urban League, and we had a gentleman who owns a solar company, and they got connected because of that. And out of that introduction, a relationship developed between the two organizations. And now the Urban League in Madison has a program where they train people to become solar installers, and this solar company hires them as fast as they can turn them out. And so, we're getting, people, employment and on a career path in clean energy. And I think, and this reaches so far beyond potentially, Dane County, obviously, or the United States. When we look at the developing world and the opportunities that renewable energy presents for electrification, for sinking wells, for providing entrepreneurship opportunities. This is the direction that the world economy is heading in, which is why I hope the U.S. stays on the path that it has begun, over the past year. But I really think and I'm not an expert in international development, but I do know that there's so much opportunity to improve people's lives and provide not only employment, but opportunities to develop and grow businesses for entrepreneurs too.
Any other questions? Oh, David has
I just have a comment, and as one of the volunteers, I'd say you have a lot of volunteers because you have employees that make life so good for the volunteers.
Thank you. We
They're
appreciate
endlessly
that.
patient with those. Many of the volunteers, including myself, are old, slow, and rather unskilled, and they're very patient with us. We learn all the time, and we have a lot of fun. I think particularly of Lars Higson and Shane Otto and that crew are just a wonderful crew to work with.
I'm so glad. They're patient with, I'm sorry. I was going to say, they're patient with me too, so I appreciate that. You're right, they're wonderful. We're blessed with the staff we have in Dane County, and especially that Parks Department. They're just wonderful and skilled people. And believe me, you all brighten up their day too, because we want everyone to feel ownership in our parks, right? We don't want our parks, we don't want them to be county government's parks, right? They're everybody's parks, they're the people's parks, and we're the vehicle for that.